Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to admit, I've been staring at the stack of research on the desk today for about 20 minutes, just, trying to figure out the safest way to start this conversation.
Safest. That's an interesting choice of words. Why safe?
Because today we are walking right into a minefield. We are talking about the G word.
Yes, gentrification.
Gentrification. It is, without a doubt, the single most charged buzzword in modern urban life. You drop this word at a dinner party and the air just it leaves the room. You say it at a city council meeting and people aren't just listening, they're screaming.
Right. It's a word that everyone uses, but I'm not sure everyone uses it to mean the same thing.
That's it exactly. I have this nagging suspicion that most of us, myself included, are using it as a blunt instrument rather than a precise tool.
That is a very, very fair assessment. It's become this catch-all term for, change I don't like, or on the other side, change that makes me feel guilty.
Yeah.
But the actual mechanics of it, how it works, what drives it, that's often completely misunderstood.
And that's the hook for me. Because on the surface, there is this massive paradox. It's a huge contradiction.
How so?
Well, if I describe the symptoms of gentrification without actually using the word, better infrastructure, lower crime rates, new businesses opening up, property values rising, streets getting cleaned.
All good things on paper.
They sound like the definition of success. That sounds like the American dream, or really the global dream of progress.
Right. If you are a tax assessor or a city planner looking at a spreadsheet, those things look like victory. They look like a win.
But then you flip the coin, and suddenly those exact same changes are described with words like colonialism. You hear phrases like erasure, displacement, cultural destruction. We have reports in here of protests involving pigs' heads.
Which we are definitely getting to.
Oh, absolutely. And arson campaigns. So the mission for this deep dive isn't to sit here and moralize. We aren't going to decide if gentrification is good or bad in a binary sense.
We want to look at the machine itself. We want to take the cover off and see the gears. How does a neighborhood actually change? Who are the specific players pulling the levers?
And what does the data actually say versus what it feels like on the ground? Because that gap is huge.
It's massive. And we want to strip away the emotion for a second. Don't worry, we'll bring it back to really understand the mechanics.
And just to set the scope for the listener, we are going wide today. We aren't just talking about the usual suspects like Brooklyn or San Francisco.
No, this is a global phenomenon. We're looking at global capital, at historical patterns that go back way, way further than I ever imagined.
Me too. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the who and the how. The source material we have is so diverse.
It really is. It ranges from these dense academic studies on eviction rates and sociological theories, all the way to boots on the ground reporting on violent clashes in Mexico City and London.
So let's start at the beginning, or at least where the word began.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people assume gentrification is this trendy 21st century coinage, maybe something that popped up in the 90s.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. But it's got a very specific birthday.
It does. It was coined in 1964 by a British sociologist named Ruth Glass.
1964.
1964. So the Beatles are on Ed Sullivan, and Ruth Glass is watching London change.
Exactly. She was observing the district of Islington in London. Now, if you go to Islington today, it is incredibly wealthy. It's Tony Blair territory.
Very posh.
Very. But in the early 60s, it was a working class area. Glass described it as being full of shabby, modest mews and cottages. It was blue-collar. It was where the workers lived.
But she noticed a shift.
She noticed a very distinct shift. She saw middle-class people moving in and buying up these cottages, these small working-class homes.
And she didn't call it revitalization.
No, that's the key. She used very aggressive, very pointed language. She called them invaders.
Wow, invaders.
She wrote, and this is a direct quote, "One by one, many of the working-class neighborhoods of London have been invaded by the middle classes." She saw it as a territory war.
Where the original working-class occupiers were being displaced.
Precisely, and that is where she stamped it with the label, gentrification.
Okay, so we have to unpack the etymology here because it's hiding in plain sight. Gentry, it sounds fancy, like gentleman.
It is rooted entirely in class distinction. The word gentry comes from the Old French gentrize, which means of gentle birth.
Of gentle birth.
In the British class system, the landed gentry were the social class just below the nobility. They weren't quite lords, but they were certainly not workers. They owned land. They were the gentle class.
So by using that specific word, Glass wasn't just describing a real estate trend. She was making a class analysis from the very beginning.
Exactly. She wasn't talking about paint colors or new doors. She was implying that the landed class, the gentry, was coming back to reclaim the city from the workers.
That reframes the entire process. It's not improvement, it's a reassertion of class dominance.
It turns a renovation project into a feudal conflict.
Wow. Okay, but speaking of history, the sources threw me a curveball that I am still trying to wrap my head around. We usually talk about this as a product of, modern capitalism, but you found historians arguing that gentrification was happening in ancient Rome.
This really blows the timeline wide open. It's not just an argument. There is archaeological evidence from Roman Britain as early as the 3rd century AD.
The 3rd century. What does gentrification even look like in the 3rd century? Are we talking about chariot lanes?
Not quite, but it looks remarkably similar to today, just with different materials. Archaeologists in Roman towns in Britain found the physical footprints of small, independent shops. Think of the butcher, the baker, the craftsperson.
The local mom-and-pop shops of their day?
Exactly. And they found evidence that these shops were being systematically wiped out and built directly on top of their foundations.
Let me guess. Luxury villas.
Large, luxurious villas. You can literally see the evidence in the ground. The small business gets bulldozed for the luxury mansion.
That's incredible. So the footprint of the city literally shifted from this mixed-use, working-class commerce to exclusive, private residential wealth.
That's right, which suggests that this dynamic of wealth displacing modesty isn't just a quirk of the 21st century housing market.
It might be a fundamental dynamic of human civilization.
It could be. Wherever power and resources accumulate, the powerful eventually want the land occupied by the less powerful. It's a very old story.
That is depressing, but also illuminating. It means we are fighting a very old urge. But let's fast forward back to today. We have this ancient practice and this word from the 60s, but defining it right now seems to be a nightmare. I was reading through the definitions in our source packet, and it feels like nobody agrees on what this actually is.
That's because the definition you choose depends entirely on your agenda. It's a political act to define it.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, if you look at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the U.S., they have a very clinical definition. They define gentrification as the transformation of neighborhoods from low value to high value.
Low value to high value. That sounds like something a robot would say. It's incredibly cold. It just strips the human element out completely.
It frames it purely as an economic variable. A number goes up, end of story. But then you look at sociologists. Someone like Hackworth defines it as the production of space for progressively more affluent users.
The production of space. I like that. It implies that the neighborhood is being manufactured. It's a product.
And who is the product for? That's the key question in his definition. It's not for the people already there.
Then you have others, like Rose, who call it a process where the new middle class culturally reshapes a working-class inner-city neighborhood.
Cultural reshaping. That feels closer to the emotional reality, doesn't it?
It does. It's not just that the rent is higher, it's that the neighborhood feels different. The smell is different. The sounds on the street are different. The entire vibe changes.
And this brings us right back to that war metaphor. There is a scholar named Kiedis, writing just this year, in 2024, who argues that we've lost the plot by softening our language.
What do you mean?
Ruth Glass used words like invasion, displacement, battle. But today, city councils and real estate developers use terms like urban revitalization.
Or regeneration, urban renaissance.
Yes, it sounds like a marketing brochure. Come experience the Renaissance of downtown.
It's a complete rebranding exercise.
Exactly. Kiedis argues that these modern terms are designed to hide the conflict. Revitalization implies the neighborhood was dead before. It erases the life that was already there.
Whereas gentrification, in its original, raw sense, forces us to look at the class struggle. It forces you to ask who is winning and who is losing.
Precisely. If you call it regeneration, you're the hero. If you call it displacement, you're the villain. The word itself is a battleground.
Well, let's look at the conquerors. Or maybe the pioneers, because it rarely starts with the billionaires, right? The guys in the suits and the big developers don't usually show up until the end.
That's right. There is a very predictable pattern, what sociologists call a stage model of gentrification. It's almost like the life cycle of an insect.
Okay, so walk me through it. Stage one, who picks it off?
It usually starts with what they call the marginal gentrifiers.
Yeah.
This is stage one.
Marginal gentrifiers, who are these people?
These are the artists, the students, the political activists, the bohemians. These are people who are typically cash poor. They don't have a lot of money in the bank, but they are culturally rich.
Right. They have education, they have taste, they have an appetite for the unconventional.
And they are not moving into the gritty neighborhood because they want to flip a house for profit. They're moving there because the rent is cheap.
And the spaces are huge.
Exactly. They want the warehouse loft with the great light to paint in. They want a place where they can play loud music or live an alternative lifestyle without a homeowners association finding them. They're looking for tolerance and affordability.
But, and here's the irony that the sources keep coming back to again and again, they are the Trojan horse.
They absolutely are, because their presence changes the signal. They move in, they open a tiny gallery in a garage, they paint a mural on a crumbling wall, maybe a local dive bar starts hosting poetry nights to attract them.
And suddenly the neighborhood isn't perceived by outsiders as scary or dangerous anymore.
No, now it's perceived as edgy, it has grit, it has character.
And that grit becomes a commodity. Which brings us to stage 2.
Stage 2. The early adopters.
Who are they?
These are people like teachers, journalists, social workers, maybe some architects. They have a steady income. They're not rich, but they can get a mortgage.
And they're attracted by the vibe the artists created.
Yes, they want to be near the cool gallery. They want the authenticity. They see the artists as a sign that the neighborhood is interesting and safe enough to invest in.
So they buy the brownstones that need a little work. They start fixing the roofs. They plant flowers in the front yard. And this is the tipping point, isn't it?
It is the absolute tipping point, because once the journalists and the teachers are there, the media starts paying attention. You get the article in the Sunday paper about the hidden gem of the city.
The city's best kept secret.
Right. The coffee shops start to upgrade from drip coffee to pour over. And crucially, the police start patrolling more often because these new residents call them about things the old residents never would have.
And that increased police presence paves the way for the final stage.
Stage 3. Super gentrification.
The sharks arrive.
The sharks arrive. The financiers, the lawyers, the tech executives, the big developers who buy whole blocks. Real estate prices don't just creep up anymore, they explode.
And the tragic irony is that this stage displaces everyone. It kicks out the original long-term low-income residents, of course. That's a given.
But it also kicks out the artists and the teachers who started the whole process.
The pioneers get pushed out by the settlers.
The neighborhood becomes too expensive for the very people who made it desirable in the first place. And we see this perfectly in Soho, New York.
Oh, Soho is the prototype, the textbook example.
In the 60s and 70s, Soho was a wasteland of abandoned textile factories. It was called Hell's 100 Acres. It was dark, dangerous, and empty at night.
And the artists moved in?
They moved in illegally. It was illegal to live in those manufacturing buildings, but it was dirt cheap. And they turned those massive cast iron lofts into studios and living spaces. They literally created the loft living aesthetic from scratch.
And now, if you walk through Soho today.
Now it is an outdoor shopping mall for global luxury brands, Chanel, Prada, Louis Vuitton. The lofts are owned by hedge fund managers who live there maybe 2 weeks a year. There are essentially 0 starving artists living in Soho today.
It's the authenticity trap.
Oh.
We consume the thing we love until it's gone.
But I want to zoom in on 2 specific demographic drivers the sources mentioned because they surprised me.
Okay.
First, the role of women. The sources argue that the rise of feminism and the changing workforce are actually major drivers of gentrification. How does that work? It's a fascinating connection. If you think about the post-war suburbs, the 1950s ideal, they were built on a very specific family model.
The nuclear family. Husband drives to the city to work. The wife stays home.
Right. The entire layout of the suburbs assumes there is someone at home full-time to manage the house, the kids, the shopping. It's isolated. You need a car for absolutely everything.
It's incredibly inefficient if you're a working parent.
Exactly. So fast forward to the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Women are entering the workforce in massive numbers, and specifically they are entering high-earning professional fields. Law, medicine, corporate business.
So now you have a dual-income household or a single mother who works full-time.
And for that woman, the suburbs are a logistical nightmare. The commute eats up 2 hours of your day. The childcare is miles away from the office. The grocery store is miles away from the daycare. It just doesn't work.
So the inner city becomes the solution.
The inner city offers proximity. It allows you to combine your paid labor, your career, and your unpaid labor parenting, household management, within a very small geographic radius.
You can walk to the daycare. You can grab dinner on the way home from the office.
The gentrification of the inner city was, in large part, a direct response to the time management crisis of working women.
That makes so much sense. It's not just about style. It's about survival and logistics. And the second group that plays a huge role is the LGBTQ plus community. We've all heard the term gayborhood.
This is a really complex and often fraught dynamic. The sources cite Manuel Castell's research on San Francisco. Historically, gay men moved into working class, often rundown neighborhoods, not to get rich, but to be safe.
They needed a sanctuary.
They needed a place where they could live together, build a community, open their own bars and businesses, and walk down the street holding hands without looking over their shoulder.
So they moved into places like the Castro in San Francisco when nobody else wanted those Victorian houses.
Exactly. And they renovated them with their own hands, with their own money. They poured love and care into these properties and built a real community infrastructure.
But the sources point out a tension here, a real double-edged sword.
Yes, because while they were marginalized for their sexuality, many of the early gay pioneers in places like San Francisco or Columbus, Ohio, were white men with steady professional incomes.
Right.
So they often had racial and economic privilege compared to the Black or Latino residents who are already living in those neighborhoods.
So you have one marginalized group unintentionally displacing another marginalized group.
That is often the friction point. In Columbus, for example, sources describe how the influx of affluent white LGBTQ plus residents into a historically Black neighborhood was viewed by some long-term residents as just another wave of white displacement. The rainbow flag didn't necessarily signal safety for everyone who lived there.
And just like with the artists, the gayborhood eventually eats itself.
It does. The neighborhood becomes safe, then it becomes cool and becomes trendy. The pink dollar attracts corporate investment, rents rise, and suddenly the queer bookstore, the drag bar, the community center, they can't afford the rent anymore.
So we're seeing the death of the gayborhood in cities all over the world.
We are. The community is being priced out of the very sanctuary it built for itself.
It seems like every version of the story ends the same way. The money wins. But let's look at the money. Let's talk about the mechanics. Because capital doesn't just accidentally flood into a neighborhood. There is a mechanism. And the sources point to a really important theory called the rent gap.
This is the engine room. If you want to understand why gentrification happens where it happens, you have to understand the rent gap. It was a theory popularized by the geographer Neil Smith.
Okay, break it down for us. Imagine I'm a developer looking at a city.
Okay. You are looking at a building in a disinvested neighborhood. Maybe it's an old tenement building. It's run down. The roof leaks. The current tenants are low income, paying maybe a few $100s a month. The rent you can collect from this building right now, what economists call the capitalized ground rent, is very, very low.
So on paper, it looks like a bad asset. It's not making much money.
To a normal person, yes. But to an investor, you aren't looking at what it is. You are looking at what it could be.
The potential.
You are looking at the potential ground rent. If you evicted everyone, gutted the building, put in hardwood floors and stainless steel appliances and granite countertops, and rented it to a lawyer, what would it be worth then?
A lot more. A whole lot more.
That difference, the gap between the current low value and the potential high value, that is the rent gap.
So paradoxically, the worse a neighborhood gets, the more rundown and devalued it becomes, the bigger the rent gap gets.
Exactly. And this is the dark cynicism of the real estate market. A neighborhood has to hit rock bottom to become a good investment.
The decay is what creates the opportunity.
Right. And deindustrialization played a huge role here. In the 70s and 80s, when the factories closed in these inner cities, working class people lost their incomes. They couldn't pay high rent. Landlords stopped maintaining the buildings because they weren't making money. So the housing stock decayed.
And that decay created the value valley. It widened the rent gap.
It created the potential for massive, massive profit. If the gap is small, if a neighborhood is already stable and middle class, there is no real money to be made. Developers need the gap. They need the decay to be able to make their return.
So they wait for the gap to widen and then snap the capital trap shuts. That brings us to the impact, the human cost. Because if I asked a random person on the street, what is the worst thing about gentrification, they would say displacement.
Without a doubt.
They would say it kicks poor people out of their homes. It's the defining narrative.
It is. But this is where the deep dive gets really tricky. Because the data doesn't always back that narrative up in the way you'd think.
I have to say, I was really skeptical when I read this part. How can the data not show displacement? It seems obvious.
It's incredibly counterintuitive. The sources cite a number of studies by economists like Jacob Vigdor and Lance Freeman, and a more recent 2023 Princeton study.
Yeah.
And they looked at eviction rates and mobility patterns.
And what did they find?
They found that Often, the probability of a poor household moving out of a gentrifying neighborhood is actually lower or the same as the probability of a poor household moving out of a non-gentrifying poor neighborhood.
Wait, hang on. How is that possible? If my rent doubles, I leave. It's simple math.
Well, first you have to understand the baseline. Poor neighborhoods that aren't gentrifying are incredibly unstable places.
Okay.
People are constantly moving because of financial distress, job loss, poor housing conditions, crime, or eviction. It's a constant revolving door of crisis. Life is precarious.
So the baseline is already chaos and high turnover.
Right. So when a neighborhood starts to gentrify, some of the existing residents actually fight harder to stay. They see the improvements, the safer streets, the better grocery stores, the cleaner parks, and they value them. They double up, they get roommates, they do whatever they can to hold on because the neighborhood is finally getting better.
But people are disappearing. We see the demographics flip. A neighborhood goes from 80% black to 80% white in a decade. If they aren't all being evicted at higher rates, where are they going?
This is the concept you need to burn into your brain. Exclusionary displacement.
Exclusionary displacement. Okay, unpack that for me.
Think of it less like an eviction notice and more like a locked door. In any neighborhood, there is natural turnover. People move. A low-income family moves out because the dad got a job in another state or the kids are grown.
Sure, that happens everywhere.
In the past, another low-income family would have moved into that empty apartment. The cycle would continue. But in a gentrifying neighborhood, when that low-income family moves out for whatever reason, the landlord doesn't rent it to another low-income family.
No, they renovate it. They triple the price.
Exactly. And a rich family moves in. So the poor family wasn't technically kicked out by the landlord,
Yeah.
but no poor family can ever move in again.
The door locks behind them. The housing stock available to low-income people shrinks unit by unit, not through mass evictions, but through attrition. Over a decade, the community just vanishes.
That's it. It's insidious. It's invisible displacement. You can't photograph an eviction notice that was never served.
And it explains why the eviction data might look stable, while the lived reality on the ground feels like a complete erasure.
Precisely.
There is another form of displacement that feels very political, and it was in the research. School gentrification. This section really frustrated me.
It is a massive issue in the United States especially. You have a wave of white, affluent gentrifiers moving into a neighborhood. They buy the houses, they fix them up, they love the diversity.
But they don't send their kids to the local public school.
They don't. They use private schools or they use the school choice system to get into a charter school or a magnet school across town.
So you have this bifurcated community. The new residents live there, but their lives are completely separate from the long-term residents.
But, and this is the kicker, they still want control. The research shows these new, affluent parents whose kids don't even go to the local school often take over the parent-teacher organization, the PTO, or they run for the local school board.
So they're literally governing a school their own children do not and will never attend.
Yes. Or they use their political power to shift the priorities of the entire district to benefit the schools their kids do attend. And financially, it can be a disaster for that local neighborhood school.
How so?
In the U.S., there's something called Title I funding. This is federal money given to schools specifically based on the poverty level of the student body.
I see where this is going.
If the average income of the zip code rises because of all the new wealthy residents, the school might lose that crucial poverty funding.
Even if the actual students in the classrooms are still predominantly low income.
Exactly. So the low-income kids who are still there, the ones who need that money the most for free lunches, for tutoring, for after-school programs, suddenly see their programs cut because the neighborhood looks rich on a census form.
That is the ultimate insult. You get all the downsides of gentrification, the higher prices, feeling out of place, and your school loses money on top of it all.
And that feeling of being out of place, it has real health consequences. The sources point to studies showing that for children and the elderly who stay in gentrifying areas, diagnoses of anxiety and depression spike.
It's not just financial stress. It's the psychological stress of being a stranger in your own home.
And it's the stress of surveillance. We have to talk about crime and policing. The common narrative is gentrification brings down crime. And statistically, in the short term, that is often true.
But at what cost?
The cost is a change in the nature of policing. New residents have different norms, different expectations. They call the police on things the original residents wouldn't.
Like what?
They call the cops on noise from a backyard barbecue. They call the cops on teenagers hanging out on the corner, something that might have been a community norm for decades.
The suspicious person reports go through the roof.
Exactly. And who's usually labeled suspicious in these contexts?
Yep.
Young men of color. Suddenly, the local kids are being stopped and frisked constantly because a new resident feels unsafe just seeing them exist.
So the neighborhood becomes a police state for the original residents, so it can feel like a sanctuary for the new ones.
That's a very good way of putting it. It's a fundamental culture clash played out through 911 calls.
This is a heavy picture. And I think, especially for us, it's easy to view this through a very American lens. We think of Brooklyn, we think of D.C., of San Francisco, but Section 5 of our deep dive takes us around the world. And honestly, some of the global stories are even more intense.
They really are. Let's start with London, where the term was born.
London is operating on a different level now, isn't it?
Entirely. We talked about Ruth Glass in Islington in the 60s. That was middle class displacing working class. But researchers now are studying super gentrification in places like Barnesbury.
What makes it super?
It's no longer the middle class displacing the working class. It is the global financial elite displacing the affluent middle class. We are talking about banker bonus territory. Russian oligarchs, Saudi princes.
So the teachers and the architects, the stage 2 people we talked about, they're getting kicked out now.
Absolutely. If you don't work in high finance in the City of London, you cannot afford to live there. The sources mention that rising prices in London led to a doubling of evictions by private landlords in just a few years. It is a ruthless market where a house isn't a home, it's just an asset on a global balance sheet.
And then you have a place like Mexico City. This is a very specific, very modern phenomenon, the digital nomad.
This is the post-COVID acceleration of a trend that was already happening. You have neighborhoods like Condesa and Roma. They're beautiful, leafy, historic districts. And suddenly, they are flooded with Americans and Europeans working remotely on their laptops and cafes.
And they're bringing their salaries with them. It's dollarization.
That's the key word. If I am earning a San Francisco tech salary in U.S. dollars, a $2,000 a month rent in Mexico City feels like an absolute bargain. I'll pay it without blinking.
But for a local earning in Mexican pesos.
For the local, that is an impossible sum. It's 3 or 4 times the average local wage. So the entire rental market gets distorted and repegged to the U.S. dollar.
And it creates a weird social friction.
A huge friction. Suddenly, all the menus are in English. The waiters are expected to speak English. The whole neighborhood starts to cater to foreigners who are just passing through. And the sources mentioned violent protests that broke out for July of 2025.
Violent.
Yes, where locals physically clashed with tourists and digital nomads. The grievance wasn't just about rent. It was about being erased in your own city.
And being pushed out to the margins.
Exactly. It forces locals to the periphery of the city, to places with no reliable water infrastructure, 2-hour commutes on crowded buses. It's a form of invisible social segregation.
Speaking of segregation, we have to talk about South Africa. Given the history of apartheid, gentrification there carries a completely different and much heavier weight.
It is deeply tragic. Under apartheid, the government legally decided where you could live based on your race. They used the Group Areas Act to bulldoze vibrant, non-white neighborhoods.
That ended in the 90s legally.
Legally, yes.
Okay.
But activists there now argue that financial apartheid has simply replaced racial zoning.
So you can legally live anywhere, but you can only afford to live in the same places you were forced to before.
Precisely. Look at the Bo-Kaap neighborhood in Cape Town.
Yeah.
It is famous for those brightly colored houses and cobblestone streets. It is the historic center of the Cape Malay Muslim community. It survived apartheid, but now...
It's too pretty for its own good. It's become picturesque.
It's picturesque. It's Instagrammable. And wealthy outsiders, mostly white South Africans and Europeans, want to buy the colorful houses. And the tactics used to get people out are just brutal.
What do you mean?
In the nearby Woodstock district, sources describe landlords on a street called Gympie Street cutting off water and electricity to buildings, illegal lockouts, to force long-term rent-paying tenants to leave so they can renovate and flip the properties.
That is basically biological warfare, cutting off someone's water.
It shows you how high the stakes are. When the rent gap is big enough, the humanity of the tenant becomes an obstacle to be removed.
We see a similar story of physical erasure in Canada. I had never even heard of Hogan's Alley in Vancouver.
Most people haven't, and that's the point. It doesn't exist anymore. It was Vancouver's first and only concentrated black community. It was a vibrant hub of jazz clubs and restaurants.
And what happened?
In the 1960s, the city bulldozed it to build a viaduct to highway ramp.
That is state-sponsored gentrification.
It's urban renewal used as a weapon. They officially labeled it a slum to justify destroying it, and we're still seeing it. In St. Roch, Quebec City, it used to be a working-class neighborhood. Then the government lured in Ubisoft and other tech companies.
The creative class strategy.
Right. Bring in the video game developers. It sounds great for the economy, but the generational residents of St. Roch suddenly find themselves living in a tech campus they can't afford and where they no longer feel welcome.
It's the same pattern everywhere. Poland, Italy, Lodz in Poland turning old textile factories into lofts. Milan's Isola district, which used to be isolated by railways, literally an island, now it's home to those futuristic vertical forest skyscrapers.
The pattern is global. Industrial collapse, decay, rent gap, rebranding, displacement. It's a formula.
But, and this is where the story gets really heated, people aren't just watching this happen. Section 6 is about the backlash. And some of these protests are wild. We have to talk about the serial killer cafe.
This is a classic case study in symbolic protest. This was in London 2015 in Shoreditch.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Shoreditch was traditionally a poor, gritty East End neighborhood. Then the hipsters moved in, and then these two brothers open a cafe, and the only thing they sell is cereal.
Like, just milk and cereal.
Yeah.
From a box.
Yes. Sugary, nostalgic, mostly American cereal. Fruit Loops, Lucky Charms, Captain Crunch. But they were charging £4 or £5 a bowl.
£5 for a bowl of cereal. In a neighborhood where there are children living in poverty.
Exactly. It became a lightning rod. It was the ultimate symbol of hipster indulgence. It was childish. It was arrogant. And one night, a mob of anti-gentrification protesters descended on the cafe.
This wasn't a peaceful picket line from what I read.
No. This was organized chaos. They had torches. They had pigs' heads on sticks.
Pigs' heads.
Yes. It was meant to be visceral and terrifying. They threw paint bombs at the windows. They set off smoke bombs. They terrorized the customers inside. It was never really about the cereal.
It was about the insult.
It was about the insult. The cereal represented a class of people who had so much disposable income, they could treat a basic foodstuff as an ironic, expensive joke right in the face of people who were struggling to eat.
It's symbolic vandalism. And we saw another, maybe even more tone-deaf disaster in Denver, the Inc. coffee scandal.
Oh, this one just makes me wince every time I read about it. This was 2017, 5 Points, Denver. Historically, this was the Harlem of the West, a crucial Black cultural hub.
And this coffee shop opens up.
And one day they put out a metal sandwich board sign on the sidewalk. On one side it said, happily gentrifying the neighborhood since 2014.
No. They actually wrote that down and put it on the street.
It did. And the other side said, quote, nothing says gentrification like being able to order a cortado.
They thought it was funny. They thought they were being cheeky and self-aware.
They thought they were in on the joke. They didn't realize that for their neighbors, gentrification wasn't a joke. It was an existential threat. A photo of the sign went viral almost instantly.
And the backlash was huge.
It was immediate. People protested outside the shop for days. It was vandalized. Someone spray-painted white coffee on the window. It became this national news story about the sheer arrogance of new businesses moving into historic communities.
It just shows a total lack of empathy. It's treating the neighborhood as a playground rather than a community of people.
And then in San Francisco, the rage turned against the tech giants themselves. This was the tech bus wars of 2013.
The Google buses.
Right. These massive, sleek, white private shuttles with tinted windows. They would drive into the city's diverse neighborhoods, like the Mission District, to pick up Google and Apple employees and shuttle them down to their campuses in Silicon Valley.
And they use the public city bus stops for free.
Yes. So imagine you're a local waiting for the public bus that's probably late and overcrowded, and this gleaming private spaceship pulls up to your stop.
And the people inside are on Wi-Fi, drinking artisanal coffee, completely separated from the city they live in, but are also transforming.
It was a perfect visual representation of a two-tiered society. A private infrastructure for the rich, overlaid on top of a crumbling public one for everyone else.
And people attacked the buses.
They did. They blocked them with their bodies. Protesters vomited on the windshields. They smashed windows. It was class war manifest on a street corner.
And sometimes the backlash goes even further than protests. In Wales, you found a group that actually used arson as a political tool.
Yes, Mybi and Glyndŵr, the Sons of Glyndŵr. This was a campaign that ran from the late 70s into the 90s. This wasn't about coffee or cereal. This was about language and culture.
What was the issue?
Wealthy English people were buying up cottages in Welsh-speaking villages to use as holiday homes
Pricing out the locals who grew up there.
and killing the Welsh language. If a village becomes 50% empty for 10 months a year, the school closes, the post office closes, the pub closes, and the Welsh language dies. It stops being a living community.
So what did they do?
So this group, under the cover of night, burned down English-owned holiday cottages, hundreds of them, over more than a decade. It was a violent nationalist campaign to stop what they saw as the cultural erosion of their nation.
So we have the mechanics, the global pain, and the violent rage. The big question remaining is, can it be controlled? Is this just the inevitable march of capitalism, or is there a way to improve a neighborhood without destroying it? Section 7 looks at policy.
There are tools, but I have to be honest, based on the research, they are all imperfect. The most common one you hear about is inclusionary zoning.
That's the mix approach, right? A little something for everyone.
Yes, a city tells a developer, okay, you can build your 20-story luxury high-rise, but you have to set aside 15% or 20% of the units as affordable housing.
Does it work?
It helps a little. It creates some units, but it's often a drop in the bucket compared to the need. And the definition of affordable is often skewed. It's often based on the area median income. If the area is already becoming rich, the AMI is high. So affordable might mean a rent of $2,500 a month. That doesn't help the barista or the home health aide making minimum wage.
What about the German model? The notes mention milieu conservation laws. That sounds interesting.
This is fascinating and very different from the Anglo-American approach. In cities like Munich, the municipality has the legal power to protect the social composition of a district.
What does that mean in practice?
It means they can block certain types of renovations. If a landlord wants to combine two small apartments into one big one or install luxury amenities like a balcony that would justify a massive rent hike, the city can literally say, no, that changes the character of the neighborhood. Permit denied.
That is a level of government intervention I can't even imagine in most of the U.S. They're basically outlawing fancy.
They are prioritizing the social fabric and the people over the maximum potential property value. A very different philosophy.
I was really interested in the community land trust, or CLT concept, that seems more structural, more permanent.
CLTs are kind of the gold standard for anti-gentrification activists. The idea is to take land out of the speculative market entirely.
How does it work?
A nonprofit trust owns the land forever. They might sell the house that sits on the land to a low-income family at a reduced price. So the family owns the physical building, the walls, and the roof, but not the dirt underneath it.
Okay, I follow.
And the deal is this. When that family decides to sell the house, they can only sell it for a limited, pre-agreed-upon profit. They can't flip it for the new, crazy market value. This ensures that the house stays affordable for the next low-income family and the next in perpetuity.
It decommodifies the home. It treats it as shelter, not as an investment vehicle to get rich from.
Exactly. It stops the speculation cycle cold, at least for that one piece of property.
And finally, we have to touch the third rail of housing policy, rent control.
The eternal debate. Most economists, to be fair, generally hate it. They argue that if you cap rents, developers will have no incentive to build new housing, which reduces the overall supply and actually drives up prices in the long run on non-controlled units.
But tenants who have it love it.
Of course. For the incumbent tenant, the grandmother on a fixed income who's lived there for 40 years, it is a lifesaver. It is the only thing keeping her in her home and her community. But there is a massive, dangerous loophole in many rent control laws called vacancy decontrol.
The loophole.
In many cities, rent control only protects the current tenant. The moment they move out or pass away, the landlord can reset the rent to whatever the market will bear.
Which puts a giant target on that tenant's back.
Precisely. It incentivizes the landlord to harass the tenant, to ignore repairs, to make life miserable. Because if they can just get that low-rent tenant to leave, they hit the financial jackpot. It turns long-term residents into financial liabilities.
It seems like every single solution has a major side effect. It feels like we're trying to stop a tidal wave with a sandcastle.
That is because we are often trying to solve a problem of global capital flows with local policy band-aids. As long as housing is treated primarily as a vehicle for investment and profit, displacement is the logical, predictable outcome of the system.
So let's wrap this up. We've gone from Roman villas to Munich zoning laws, from cereal cafes to community land trusts. What is the synthesis here? What's the big takeaway?
I think the synthesis is that cities must change. A city that doesn't change is a dying city. If you don't have new investment, new people, new ideas, you have decay and abandonment. The question is never if a city will change. The question is, who is the change for?
And it goes right back to that authenticity trap we talked about.
The sociologist Sharon Zukin's concept. We crave the authentic city. We want the history, the diversity, the grit, so we move there to be part of it. But by moving there and bringing our money and our consumer preferences with us, we slowly but surely destroy the very authenticity we crave.
We're the observers who ruin the experiment just by watching it.
We kill the thing we love by consuming it.
So here is the final thought I want to leave you with today. And it's a bit of a provocative one. It's really a question for the mirror. If you moved to your current neighborhood because it was up and coming or edgy or it had great potential, ask yourself, are you the pioneer? Or are you the colonizer?
And when you buy that $6 oat milk latte from the new cafe, does your presence and your money help the person serving it to you afford to live in their own community? Or does it slowly, dollar by dollar, price them out of their own zip code?
It's an uncomfortable question, but I think we have to sit with it. That's the deep dive for today. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Stay curious.